Andre Miller remains one of the strangest success stories in NBA history because nothing about his game matched modern expectations of a point guard. While today's guards rely heavily on athleticism, speed, pick-and-roll shooting, and three-point volume, Miller did the opposite. He rarely shot threes, sometimes going entire seasons barely attempting any, and operated at a slow, methodical pace that made him look like he was moving in slow motion compared to everyone else. Yet this old man style consistently worked. He controlled tempo better than nearly any guard of his era, manipulated defenses using pure IQ, and dominated mismatches in the post like a 6'8" forward trapped in a 6'2" frame. Instead of beating defenders with speed, he beat them with angles, strength, timing, and deception. He played 17 years, never relied on athletic decline, and ended up 12th all-time in assists, proving his unique formula was not a fluke. Even his famous 52-point game came almost entirely from crafty post-ups and footwork instead of modern guard skills. Miller is a perfect example that basketball intelligence, fundamentals, and playmaking creativity can outweigh physical limitations. Tony Allen carved out a legendary reputation not by being well-rounded, but by being so extraordinary on defense that teams tolerated his offensive weaknesses. In fact, his lack of shooting and unreliable scoring often made him a complete non-threat on offense, to the point where opponents literally did not guard him. Yet none of that mattered because he was that good defensively. Allen had an unmatched level of intensity, focus, and physicality. He hounded superstars full court, fought over every screen, contested without fouling, and brought an emotional edge that lifted entire teams. Kobe Bryant famously called him the toughest defender he ever faced, and Kevin Durant praised him repeatedly for his ability to disrupt rhythm. With the Memphis Grizzlies, Allen became the soul of the grit and grind identity, an era defined by toughness, slow tempo, and smothering defense. His energy electrified the arena. He turned defensive stops into momentum swings and changed the psychological tone of games. Though he struggled on offense, his defensive impact was so powerful that coaches built entire schemes around his presence. Tony Allen showed that in a league full of scorers, a player with one elite speciality can still become iconic. Shaun Livingston's career is one of the most remarkable reinventions in NBA history. Early on, he was a 6'7" point guard with rare fluidity and athleticism, a prototype many compared to a young Magic Johnson. But after his catastrophic knee injury in 2007, one so severe doctors questioned whether he'd ever walk normally again. Everything about his game had to change. Instead of relying on explosiveness, Livingston rebuilt himself into a master of the mid-range and post-up fundamentals. He rarely shot threes, making only 13 in his entire career, an unbelievably low number in the modern NBA. But his mid-range turnaround, high-post touch shots, and calm, mistake-free decision-making became lethal. With the Golden State Warriors, he provided stability off the bench, punished mismatches, and offered a slow, controlled scoring option that contrasted perfectly with the team's fast-paced perimeter shooting. His efficiency was unreal, like going 13 for 14 over the first 3 games of the 2018 finals, and he never forced plays or broke the system. Livingston proved you can lose the physical gifts that once defined you, yet still become an essential piece of a championship dynasty through skill, intelligence, and adaptation. Jason Kapono might be the clearest example of a player who survived in the NBA by being extraordinary at exactly one thing: shooting the basketball. Kapono wasn't just a good shooter, he was one of the purest specialists ever to play in the league. He led the NBA in three-point percentage twice, once hitting an absurd 51% and then 49% the next year, numbers almost unheard of for high-volume shooters. His shooting form was textbook perfect, with a quick release and near-automatic accuracy when spotting up. The highlight of his career was his iconic 25-point performance in the 2007 three-point contest, which tied the then record and showcased how elite his stroke really was. But the story of Kapono isn't only about his shooting, it's also about how limited he was in every other area. He was a major defensive liability, lacked lateral quickness, couldn't create his own shot, and didn't finish well at the rim. Teams constantly targeted him on defense, and yet his shooting gravity alone kept him in the league for years. Kapono embodied the idea that if you're world-class at one skill, you can carve out a legitimate NBA career.
even if everything else is below average. Andre Roberson was a defensive savant who played with such intelligence, discipline, and versatility that coaches trusted him despite his almost non-existent offensive presence. His footwork, anticipation, screen navigation, and ability to stay connected to elite scorers made him a nightmare matchup. He guarded superstars across positions, Steph Curry, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, and consistently forced them into uncomfortable shots. But on offense, the story was the complete opposite. Teams routinely left him wide open, sometimes standing several feet away to clog the paint, knowing he couldn't make them pay. His free throw struggles were infamous, and his shooting percentages from distance forced OKC to operate essentially 4-on-5 in half-court sets. But his defensive impact was so powerful that he started alongside Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant during the Thunder's deep playoff runs. His presence elevated OKC's entire defensive system, especially in the years they were top-tier defensively. Roberson proved that elite defense alone, when it reaches historical levels, can keep a player in starting lineups even in an era obsessed with spacing and offensive versatility.
Dennis Rodman broke every rule about traditional basketball success. He wasn't a scorer, didn't space the floor, and in many systems would be considered a non-factor on offense. But what he did better than anyone, rebounding and defensive disruption, was so rare that it made him a Hall of Famer. Rodman viewed rebounding as an art, studying the spin of the ball on misses, the angles of shots from different shooters, and even opponents' tendencies to predict where the ball would land. His timing, positioning, and relentless motor allowed him to out-rebound centers half a foot taller. From 1991 to 1998, he averaged over 15 rebounds per game, a number that sounds fictional in today's NBA. Defensively, he guarded positions 1 through 5 at an elite level, frustrating superstars like Karl Malone, Shaquille O'Neal, and even Michael Jordan in practice. Off the court, his personality was chaotic and unpredictable, but on the court, he was a disciplined specialist who knew exactly what he needed to do to win. Rodman proved better than anyone that the game has room for players with extreme strengths, even if they're paired with extreme weaknesses. At just 5'3", Muggsy Bogues is the greatest statistical outlier to ever make it in the NBA. Physically, he should have had no chance. Nearly every defender he faced was at least a foot taller. But Bogues turned his size into a weapon. His low center of gravity, lightning-quick hands, and elite anticipation allowed him to pressure ball handlers full court and force turnovers at a rate few guards could match. His passing vision was underrated, and he ran offenses with precision, especially during his years with the Charlotte Hornets. Bogues couldn't shoot over defenders, couldn't finish at the rim like bigger guards, and wasn't a scoring threat, but he didn't need to be. His job was to control tempo, disrupt opposing guards, create chaos defensively, and play mistake-free basketball. He became a fan favorite not just because of his size, but because he played with courage, leadership, and intelligence. Bogues' career is a reminder that success in the NBA sometimes has less to do with physical gifts and more to do with maximizing what you can do better than anyone else. Standing 7'7" with an 8'6" wingspan, Manute Bol was a walking defensive deterrent whose specialty, shot blocking, was so overwhelming that teams altered their entire offensive approach when he was on the floor. Bol didn't merely block shots, he erased them. His timing and anticipation allowed him to swat layups, mid-range shots, and even three-pointers, something almost unheard of even today. In some seasons, he averaged over 5 blocks per 36 minutes, an absurd statistical output. Offensively, though, he contributed very little for most of his career. Limited mobility, minimal strength, and difficulty finishing through contact meant he was used primarily as a floor spacer later on, surprisingly hitting three-pointers at times. But the reason he stayed valuable was simple. He made the paint a no-go zone. Players would drive, see Bol, and instantly pull up or pass out. His presence alone reshaped spacing.
Bowl is the perfect example of an extreme specialist, one skill so powerful and so unique that it overshadows all other shortcomings. Kyle Korver's specialty wasn't just shooting, it was the combination of elite shooting with world-class off-ball movement. Korver didn't rely on isolation or dribbling. Instead, he destroyed defenses by running defenders through screens, relocating instantly after passes, and reading the floor like a quarterback. His stamina and conditioning were elite, allowing him to run non-stop for entire possessions until he found the smallest sliver of daylight. Korver's shooting mechanics were nearly flawless, and he posted seasons over 50% from three while taking high-difficulty shots on the move. His gravity alone forced teams to adjust their defensive schemes. Opponents often had to assign their best perimeter defenders to chase him exclusively. While Korver wasn't an elite defender or shot creator, his ability to warp defensive spacing made him essential for playoff teams. His years with the Hawks, Jazz, and Cavaliers showcased how a single shooter, when paired with constant movement, can transform an entire offense. Ben Wallace is one of the greatest defensive players ever, despite being undersized at center. What made him so special was his strength, instincts, and timing. Wallace wasn't a scorer. He often went entire games with 0 to 2 points, but he impacted the game on every other level. He was a ferocious rebounder, an elite rim protector, and a master at switching onto guards and forwards. His defensive IQ allowed him to anchor the 2004 Detroit Pistons, who won a championship without a superstar scorer, relying instead on discipline, toughness, and suffocating defense. Wallace won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, an accomplishment almost no one has matched. He couldn't shoot, couldn't post up, and was often ignored by defenses, but his impact was overwhelming. His presence alone shut down the paint and elevated his teammates. Wallace's career stands as proof that offense isn't the only path to greatness. If your defensive impact is generational, you can define an entire era.